Welcome to Western New York at Work. On today's show, we present a panel discussion hosted by Niagara University about socioeconomic challenges and opportunities in a climate of civil discord.
George Floyd. We know about the national circumstances that took place in Minneapolis. We also have Martin Gugino, a local gentleman, 75 years of age, that was allegedly shoved by Buffalo Police Department, police officers. And then we have Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old black man that was shot at least 4 of the 7 times in the back that took place in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The panel will discuss the impact of this discord on a number of socioeconomic areas, largely defined around racial lines. The following questions will be asked of our panelists to assess their understanding and their thought process on the civil discord, with the purpose of trying to determine, is there a meaningful effect happening on these disparities? That being said, and this is for the entire panelists, economic inequality has been shown to be rising again in the United States, and it's largely drawn around racial lines. Do you feel the current movement of an unrest has put this problem not only in the spotlight, but will it bring about real reform? And I'll start with you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Dale. Let me first thank the College of Business Administration of Niagara University, Dean Mark Frascatore, for organizing this forum, and you, Dale Martin, for moderating this forum. The circumstances that we're addressing now, the social unrest around systemic racism and police brutality, as well as the COVID-19 global pandemic, has really shined a spotlight on the disparities that exist around race in this nation, as it relates to economics, as it relates to healthcare, housing, education, and so many other issues. The protests have shined a spotlight on economic disparities and racial injustice and racial inequality. In Buffalo, we have worked very diligently and very aggressively to move a reform agenda forward. After the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, that night, as mayor, I began meeting with activists and social justice organizations in this community to formulate a strategy not only for police reform, but for racial equity, which we call the Buffalo Reform Agenda. So yes, the protests, the social unrest has had an impact not only in Buffalo, but across the nation and globally.
Thank you, Mayor. Dr. Ansari, we'd like to hear your point of view.
Sure, I'm going to ditto the mayor's pleasantries, and I'll just move forward into a couple of things. Looking at some of the data, we know that since 2001, the government has spent $4 trillion in the military, and for every dollar that the federal government spends on the military is 54 cents. We're not spending that money in healthcare, education, affordable housing, etc. We also know that there's we're one of the richest countries in the world. There is no reason why we have these kind of disparities other than moral decency. So the priority has not been those of us that are marginalized. It's been with the elite of 1% and how the dollars are spent. So we're seeing, and I can just tell you from, I'm working with the mayor in Niagara Falls, Mayor Restano, on healthcare disparities in Niagara Falls. And what we're seeing that the average rate of death for African Americans in Niagara Falls is 58. Our white counterparts are around age 70. We also know that looking at some of the research under Dr. David Williams out of Harvard, for every 7 minutes a Black person dies prematurely in the United States. 7 minutes. That means over 200 of us are dying a day of African Americans. Mr. George Floyd died in 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The healthcare system, we're dying at 7 minutes. So where do we go from here? We have to begin to look at our health and have it get an equal playing field here. So what COVID-19 has done is actually really expose all the stuff that those of us of color already know, but it actually brings it to a consciousness for change.
Okay, all right. And we're certainly going to bring a very wide perspective to this conversation. That being said, I'd like to ask the Honorable Judge Lynette Foote-Beavers her perspective.
First of all, thank you for inviting me here today to Niagara University and to the School of Business. I appreciate the invitation and thank you for having this conversation. It's so very important. Just to add on to what the mayor and Dr. Ansari have already said, I just want to bring out the point that women, and particularly women of color, are suffering quite a bit through COVID, more than, disproportionately more than others. One of the biggest issues is that so many of our women have to deal with childcare issues, and with COVID kind of causing them to not either have a place for their children to go or that they're not in a satisfactory environment. This is the problem that many women are suffering. With respect to women of color, we also see very, very high numbers of women who are working in frontline positions. And so having to leave their children is one of the big problems as well. With respect to economic inequality, we have 13 million children in this country that are living in poverty. Over 30% of those children are children of color and Black children. So this issue of COVID and all of these social justice issues that we're dealing with over the last few months are definitely uncovering this issue. The food insecurities and you know, certain areas of the city where we would consider them to be food deserts is another big economic issue, because if people cannot get healthy food, this is going to also be a major problem. And the only other thing I would like to just kind of highlight is the homelessness issue that I think is definitely exacerbated with COVID. We have so many people, and my understanding from the Department of Social Services is that within the next few months, we are really going to see a drastic increase of women and children who are homeless due to the COVID crisis. And so that is another issue that I think is going to really be something that leadership will have to deal with. And the only way that we're going to be able to deal with this issue is to deal with it from the top down, and that there's got to be real reform, real change. And as Dr. Ansari said, putting the money in the resources where it is clearly needed.
Thank you, Judge. Okay. Bishop Michael Badger, the same question to you. However, I would like to ask if you would add an additional component with that. For example, can you also combine the role of the church? What is the role of the church and its responsibility during this civic discourse?
Thank you, Dale, for the question, and thank you to Niagara University for having this discussion. The question as far as what the church's position is, I think what I'm seeing happen right now is that there are 25 churches in Western New York that are calling every person in Erie County to make sure. We started basically in the zip codes where we know there's been less attention given to healthcare and where many people don't have primary physicians. We called over 200,000 people in the last 90 days and asking, did they have any symptoms? Do they have a primary care physician? And we've taken food to well over 1,200 families on a weekly basis. This is what the church, 25 of the churches are doing in the Erie County, and Niagara County is also added in that, of churches that are making a difference.
Part of the narrative that I've heard each and every one of you speak to is institutionalized racism. So I'm going to bring this back over to Dr. Ansari. Would you say there's been an impact of institutionalized racism in the health and welfare in our community, and especially in the healthcare?
One of the things that we're grappling with now is the impact that as a provider, we can't do very much. We see you maybe once a year, but the science says that where you play, work, educated, live has more of an impact on your health. It impacts your health outcome. So we see a direct correlation between poverty and racism on your health. That's why we're dying at much earlier rates, and that's why we have these chronic diseases.
And at this time, I really would like to open this up to any of the other panelists. Is there anyone that would like to comment on Dr. Ansari's comments?
I think one of the misnomers in our community, and we're starting to find this out now, is that as long as you have this systematic racism that is taking place, and it's layered. So we've had the opportunity and the privilege to have a Black president, but not much change for Black America. And the reason why is because it doesn't matter who the executive is in office when, you know, the institution or the system that is built, the people that built that system decide the outcome. And so even though we've had Blacks in political positions, not much has happened. I'm not saying that there hasn't been any change. There has been change, but not the significant change that we need, because systematically it hampers any executive in office and limits what they can do in office. It doesn't matter the color of the person in office, because the system is driving the results.
I'm going to bring this back over to the Honorable Mayor. Mayor, are there any type of policy changes that can be implemented that can affect change, whether we're talking about systematic change in education, housing, employment, even including wealth?
There are many policy changes that can make a difference. And as was just underscored by Dr. Ansari and Bishop Badger, we see during this period of time with COVID-19 and the protests around racial equity, that systemic racism is real. For far too long, people in our country really denied that systematic racism was real. And so to have an impact on the reality of systematic racism, you need the intentionality of specific policies to address it, whether it is in the area of healthcare, housing, education, economic development, banking. There can no longer be a colorblind response to the kind of policy interventions that need to be applied to address hundreds of years systematic racism in this country.
Western New York at Work is brought to you by our key business partners and many business professionals.
Bocce's Club Pizza, Staff Buffalo, Buffalo Healthy Living, CAI, Hope Buffalo, Embassy Suites, 716 Limousine.
Type 2 diabetes can have a big impact on your life, but how can it be prevented? Well, the first step is knowing if you have prediabetes, a serious medical condition that puts you at high risk for type 2 diabetes. 1 in 3 American adults has prediabetes, but more than 80% don't know they have it. The good news is, prediabetes can be reversed, and for many people, healthy changes in their daily routine can make a big difference. Take the 1-minute risk test today at doihaveprediabetes.org.
You know, a lot of people say, when you're going somewhere, you don't want to look back. But I beg to differ. I can't lie and say it was easy. I looked at everything in a different light. I realized it started with me going back and getting my high school diploma.
When I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by stars. But now I get to search for life in the universe. And who knows, maybe life is looking for us too.
So we're like aliens to them?
Yeah. Does anyone want to be a scientist now?
I do.
Awesome. We need more girls in STEM.
Maybe we can find aliens.
Well, we're at the halfway mark of today's conversation. And for anyone that is just now joining us, today's topic is social economic challenges and opportunities in a climate of civil discord. Many Black and Hispanic youth today are less likely to have completed high school or college. And this has caused a major problem during these times of disparities, particularly as it relates to unemployment. How do you feel that we can change that environment? And I would like to start with the Honorable Judge answering that question.
I think one of the first steps that needs to take place is cultural competence of faculty and administrators. I think it's very difficult to educate children that you don't know or understand their backgrounds and their cultures. I think what happens with many students is they become very frustrated trying to get through their academic courses, trying to work through maybe some family issues and things that are going on at home, and they're not able to really be understood fully by faculty. So, I mean, we do that here at the court. Buffalo has such a diverse population. And because I'm the domestic violence judge, I often see people who in their country, it might be okay to handle a situation in a particular way with their child or with their spouse. But understanding that is something that I research all of the time so that I can understand the people who come before me and explain to them that maybe things are different here, but at least I understand perhaps why a crime was committed. I think the same thing is true for educators. Students can do the work. Students are smart. Students are capable of completing their courses. What happens is that the challenges that they face with respect to faculty or other students and things that they feel that they're not understood can often make them frustrated. And I think cultural competence is one of the first things that needs to happen in regular education of faculty and administrators to understand the children that they are serving.
There is systemic inequality in education that has to be addressed. We saw that as the Buffalo Public Schools were looking at going remotely to start the school year, where many children in the school district didn't have access to the internet in the home to get homework assignments, to do research, and to be able to get their learning, to get their education while things are going remotely. The City of Buffalo, the Buffalo Public Schools worked with the Buffalo Bills, who are helping the school district provide internet access for 4,550 low-income children in the Buffalo Public Schools. I mean, that's significant. And I have to thank the players who worked with us to lead that effort. Jerry Hughes, Josh Norman, Dion Dawkins, Taiwan Jones, Harrison Phillips, providing internet access for children in the Buffalo Public Schools.
At this time, I'd like to kind of move in a different direction. And Mayor, you spoke about police reform at the beginning of today's conversation. So the question is, can you talk about the issue of police reform, what has been done, what is currently happening, and what do we need to do going forward?
So when we look at police misconduct, police brutality, and the concerns around that issue, and so many of the incidents that we have seen in this country over the years, but some of the policies and procedures that we have put in place, so we have banned most no-knock warrants. That was the kind of search warrant that led to the killing of Breonna Taylor. We have banned chokeholds with the Buffalo Police Department. Eric Garner was killed by a chokehold in New York City. We've increased the transparency of police policy. So the Buffalo Police Department Manual of Procedure is on the Buffalo Police Department website now. It's on the City of Buffalo website. We've created a behavioral health team to respond to calls in the community for people that are experiencing mental health issues or other behavioral issues, so that we don't have purely a police response, but a response where police officers and social workers will respond together. All totaled, we have implemented 18 new policies and procedures at the call of members of our community. I'm very proud to say, even though it hasn't necessarily been picked up in a lot of circles, when you look at policing reform, Buffalo has been identified as a leader in New York State, and we're actually a leader in police reform across the nation.
It's important that we talk about things that have not been put on the table. And there's no way we can get to everything in a short period of time. But the point is, what have we not talked about? What needs to be said today before we close out today's show?
I think that we were going to discuss a little bit about affirmative action. And I do feel that that's a discussion that needs to be had, because with all of this about diversity and systemic racism and all of that, I think it's good that conversations are happening. I think that there have been some good progress with respect to affirmative action. Our police departments and our fire departments look much different than they did 30 years ago, and that's a very good thing. But if you have not read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, it is something I highly recommend that people read, because she deals with this issue of affirmative action in such a wonderful way. But I think even though it's dealing with the criminal justice system predominantly in her book, you can apply the principles that she talks about to every system in our country. And I think it's really important for us to remember that, you know, affirmative action, I'll just use as an example, she describes it as a racial bribe or a real tool for racial justice. And so I think we have problems because sometimes, you know, we hear about success stories of African Americans like Barack Obama and Colin Powell and whoever else, even judges being elected, that somehow this is solving the problem, and it's not. It's just masking it. And it is really kind of diverting us from the true issue of racial equality in this country. And so I think that we have to deal with the systemic issues. The only way that we can do that is by the top down, our leadership. It's really important that I think there's an independent assessment of some of these systems. We were talking earlier about the police department. There is a culture in policing throughout this country, and I think people have seen that just watching the news. There is a culture that needs to be changed, and that has to happen from the top down. One thing I'm really proud of that our Chief Judge, Janet DeFiore, has done for the court system is she has engaged in independent review of all of our operations. She has asked Jay Johnson, the prior Secretary of Homeland Security under President Obama, to review everything that we do here in the court system, our operations, our policies, our procedures, to determine how we can fix the systemic racism that we know is here. We didn't purposefully create it, but we know it's here. And I think it's wonderful that she has taken that leap to say, look, we're exposing ourselves completely. We're putting this in the hands of an independent person to say, what are you doing right? What are you doing wrong? And what do you need to fix? And I think until everyone decides to do that and feel comfortable and have the courage to do it, we are going to continue to see the little fixes, the little mask to this problem. And yes, there are people who are African American who have been able to rise to positions of authority. But if they don't have the courage once they get there to make the changes, or if they want to keep everything to themselves and be selfish about it and not help others come up, then I think the systemic problems that we're facing will continue.
Great, thank you so much. And in the balance of time, we're going to try to have these next few questions spread out. So Bishop, I'll start with you. Any burning desire to share some information that we have not put on the table today that we absolutely should?
Well, I think we kind of covered it, but I think it's really important. The union issue to me is a real important issue when it comes to education of our kids, especially in urban settings. The contracts that are negotiated in cities like Buffalo versus a city like Amherst or Lancaster, when it comes to our teachers, when it comes to police, because so many of them don't live in the community, they're not worried about the impact that it's having. But I can tell you right now, the union issues are impacting our children tremendously when you talk about teaching. And just the injustice is happening with our kids because so many of these teachers, their kids don't go to the schools, they don't live in our community. And I think this is a major, major issue. And without education, I don't see how we get through or get how we rise above the challenges that we face as a people. And so at right at the beginning of social justice has to be education.
In fact, thank you all to each and every one of you for having this discussion, something that's not only needed in our community, not just once, but this needs to be a continuing discussion throughout all of West New York.
Western New York at Work is brought to you by our key business partners and many business professionals.
Bocce's Club Pizza, Staff Buffalo, Buffalo Healthy Living, CAI, Hope Buffalo, Embassy Suites, 716 Limousine.